The prairie stretched out in three directions like a question with no good answer. Elena sat on her trunk, the only thing Thomas hadn't taken, and stared at the dirt between her boots. The morning sun was already mean, beating down on her shoulders through the thin cotton of her dress. Sweat traced a line down her spine. Her mouth tasted like dust and bad decisions. He'd left her here 4 hours ago, maybe 5. Time moved strange when you were trying to figure out how spectacularly you'd ruined your life. "Just wait here," he'd said, eyes not quite meeting hers. "I'll come back with the wagon. We'll figure it out." She'd known he was lying, could see it in the way his hands fumbled with the reins, the way his voice went soft and careful like he was talking to a spooked horse. But she'd nodded anyway, because the alternative was admitting she'd followed a man 2,000 miles for absolutely nothing. The trunk beneath her was solid walnut, heavy as regret. Her father had made it. "For your marriage journey," he'd said, not knowing that journey would end at a nameless crossroads with her fiancé riding off toward California, and a life that apparently didn't include her anymore. She should have seen it coming. The way Thomas had stopped talking about their plans somewhere around Nebraska. The way he'd started mentioning how much easier things would be if he got established first. The way his promises had gone from will to all to maybe to nothing at all. Elena pulled her canteen from the trunk and took a small sip. Half full. She'd need to make it last. The nearest town, assuming the map Thomas had left wasn't another lie, was maybe 10 miles south. Maybe. A wagon appeared on the eastern road, emerging from the heat shimmer like something she'd imagined. She stood, shading her eyes. Not Thomas. The wagon was bigger, loaded with supplies, pulled by 2 thick-shouldered draft horses that looked half dead from the heat. The driver was a man in his 60s, weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He slowed as he approached, taking in the sight of her, a woman alone at a crossroads with a trunk and not much else. "You broke down?" he called. Something like that. He pulled the horses to a stop, set the brake. "Name's Dutch Calloway. I'm heading to the Rourke Ranch, about 12 miles northwest. You need a ride somewhere?" "South," Elena said. "Toward..." The wagon made a sound like a gunshot. Dutch swore, jumping down as the left rear wheel canted at an ugly angle. The axle had cracked clean through. "Hell," Dutch said, crouching to inspect the damage. "Hell and damnation." Elena walked over, knelt beside him. The brake was bad, but not impossible. "You carrying any spare timber?" "Got some planks in back, but..." "And tools?" Dutch looked at her like she'd started speaking Portuguese. "Miss, I appreciate the concern, but do you have tools or not?" Something in her voice made him stop. Made him really look at her. Whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. "Toolbox under the bench seat." Elena stood, brushed the dust from her skirt. "Get it?" 20 minutes later, she was on her back beneath the wagon, stripped down to her chemise and work skirt, face smeared with grease. Dutch handed her tools when she called for them and stayed quiet otherwise, which she appreciated. The work felt good, familiar. Real in a way nothing had felt real for weeks. Her father had been a wheelwright and carpenter. She'd grown up in his workshop, learning wood and metal and the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. Thomas had called it unladylike, said she'd need to leave all that behind for their new life. She'd agreed, like a fool. "Hand me that mallet." Dutch passed it down. "Where'd you learn to do this?" "My father." Elena positioned the splint, started driving the bolt home. "He thought I should know how things work, how to fix them." "Smart man." "Dead man. 3 years now." She didn't know why she told him that. Maybe because lying under a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere stripped away the need for polite conversation. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She worked in silence after that, focused on the rhythm of repair. Brace and bolt, test and tighten, make it hold. When she finally crawled out, the sun had moved noticeably west. The repair wasn't beautiful, but it would hold. Probably get Dutch where he needed to go. She wiped her hands on a rag, suddenly aware of how she must look. Half-dressed, covered in grease and sweat, hair falling out of its pins. Dutch was staring at the wheel like it was a miracle. "I'll be damned." "You already said that." He laughed, surprised. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression went thoughtful. You said you were heading south? That was the plan. To do what? Elena opened her mouth, closed it. She had no answer, no plan. Just a vague idea about finding work, finding somewhere, finding anything that wasn't sitting at a crossroads waiting for a man who wasn't coming back. I don't know, she said finally. Dutch nodded like that made perfect sense. The Rourke Ranch needs help. House is a mess. Accounts are worse. Boss man's been alone out there since his wife died, and he's let everything go to hell except the livestock. I'm not looking for charity. I'm not offering it. I'm offering work. Hard work, from what I've seen. Place is barely holding together. He paused. But if you can fix a broken axle with scraps and spite, maybe you can fix other things too. Elena looked south toward the town and whatever uncertain future waited there, then northwest toward 12 miles of unknown. What's he like? She asked. This Rourke, Dutch considered. Honest, fair, harder on himself than anyone else. Lost his wife to fever 2 years back and hasn't quite figured out how to live with people again. But he pays on time and doesn't tolerate nonsense. And he needs a housekeeper. He needs someone who can run a household without it needing to be explained, someone who sees what needs doing and does it. Dutch gestured at the wagon. Seems like that might be you. The smart thing would be to go south. Find a respectable position in town, somewhere with other people, somewhere that made sense. But Elena was done with smart. Smart had gotten her abandoned at a crossroads. Smart had convinced her to follow a man who'd never seen her as anything more than an inconvenience. 12 miles northwest? She asked. Dutch grinned. Give or take. Help me get my trunk loaded. Check. The Rourke Ranch appeared at dusk, emerging from the grassland like something that had grown there rather than been built. The house was decent-sized, 2 stories, but it had the tired look of a place nobody cared for anymore. Paint peeling, porch sagging slightly on one side, windows that needed washing. The barn was in better shape, and the corrals held maybe 30 head of cattle that looked healthy enough. Whoever Rourke was, he took care of his livestock better than his living space. Dutch pulled the wagon up near the house and hollered, "Boss, got your supplies." The front door opened and a man stepped out. Caleb Rourke was maybe 40, tall and spare, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes that took in everything without seeming to look directly at anything. He wore work clothes that had seen better days, and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His gaze flicked to Elena, then back to Dutch. "Who's this?" "This is Miss Elena Mercer," Dutch said. "She fixed my wagon when the axle broke. Did it better than I could have done myself." "Congratulations," Caleb said, tone flat. "Dutch, supplies go in the barn like always." He started to turn away. "I'm looking for work," Elena said. Caleb stopped, turned back, really looked at her for the first time, taking in her stained dress, her greasy hands, her trunk sitting in the wagon bed. "I don't need help. Your porch is about to collapse. Your windows haven't been cleaned in months, and unless I'm wrong, you've been eating nothing but salt pork and beans for the better part of a year." She kept her voice even. "You need help." A muscle twitched in Caleb's jaw. "I didn't ask for your assessment. No, you just let everything fall apart around you while you pretend you're fine." Dutch made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh or a warning. Caleb's eyes went cold. "You don't know a damn thing about me. I know a broken porch when I see one. I know dirty windows. I know a man who's given up on everything except his cattle." Elena met his stare without flinching. "And I know I can fix it. I can't pay much. I didn't ask for much. Room and board and fair wages. I'll cook, clean, manage your household, whatever needs doing." Caleb studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing it, calculating, looking for reasons to say no. "Where'd you come from?" he asked finally. "Pennsylvania originally, most recently a crossroads about 12 miles southeast, where I got left behind by a man who decided I wasn't worth the trouble." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite sympathy, but recognition maybe. "You run from him?" "No, I just stopped following." He nodded slowly, like that answer told him something important. "You know how to manage accounts? Keep records?" "Yes." "Cook for more than one person?" "Yes." "Fix things when they break?" Elena gestured at Dutch's wagon. "Apparently." Another long pause. Then Caleb jerked his chin toward the house. Spare rooms upstairs, second door on the left. It's not much. I don't need much. Work starts at dawn. I eat breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. Don't expect conversation. Wasn't planning on it. Caleb's mouth might have twitched. Might have been the light. Dutch, help her with the trunk. He disappeared back into the house without another word. Dutch let out a breath. Well, that went better than I expected. He always that warm? That was warm. You should have seen him a year ago. Dutch climbed down from the wagon. Come on, let's get you settled before he changes his mind. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Someone, Caleb's wife probably, had made curtains once, but they hung limp and faded now, like everything else in this house. Elena set her trunk at the foot of the bed and looked around. This was it. Her new life. A room in a stranger's house, a job she'd talked her way into, a future that was hers only because she'd refused to sit at that crossroads 1 minute longer. She should feel scared, uncertain. Instead, she felt something that might have been relief. Dutch appeared in the doorway. I'll be heading out before full dark. You need anything before I go? I'm fine. Boss seems tough, but he's fair. Stick it out past the first week and you'll do all right. He tipped his hat. Good luck, Miss Mercer. Elena, and thank you for the ride. Thank you for fixing my wagon. He grinned. Saved me 3 days and a fortune in repair costs. After he left, Elena stood at the window and watched his wagon disappear into the dusk. The prairie stretched out forever in every direction, empty and vast and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Thomas was riding toward California and whatever life he'd convinced himself he deserved. He was probably relieved to be rid of her, probably telling himself he'd done her a favor. Elena hoped he remembered her like this, covered in grease, fixing what he'd broken, refusing to disappear just because he'd decided she should. She hoped it kept him up at night. Tish, the house was quiet, too quiet. Elena could hear Caleb moving around downstairs, the creak of floorboards, the clank of a pot. She should probably go down, introduce herself properly, establish some kind of working relationship. Instead, she unpacked her trunk. She didn't have much. 2 spare dresses, both practical cotton, undergarments, a shawl her mother had knitted, a small leather folder containing her parents' marriage certificate and their death records, a photograph of her father in his workshop, looking stern and uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. And at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, her father's tools. The good ones, the ones he'd made himself. She'd smuggled them into the trunk when Thomas wasn't looking, knowing somehow that she'd need them. Smart woman, she thought, smarter than she'd given herself credit for. She changed into her lease-stained dress, washed her face and hands in the basin, and tried to do something about her hair. It was hopeless, half fallen down, tangled from the wind and work. She gave up and braided it simply, tying it off with a piece of cord. Good enough. Downstairs, the kitchen was bigger than she'd expected, with a cast-iron stove, a hand pump for water, and a table that could seat 6 but currently held only dirty dishes and what looked like account ledgers. Caleb stood at the stove, frying something that smelled like salt pork. He didn't turn when she entered. I can do that, Elena said. I've been cooking for myself for 2 years. I can manage 1 more night. Fine. She moved to the table, started gathering the dirty dishes. Leave it. It's my job now, isn't it? Your job starts tomorrow. Elena kept gathering dishes. I'm already here. Might as well work. Caleb turned, spatula in hand, expression somewhere between annoyed and exhausted. You always this stubborn? Usually more so. For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. It disappeared fast, but it had been there. Pump's temperamental, needs 3 hard strokes before it'll give you anything. Noted. She washed the dishes while he finished cooking. They didn't talk. The silence should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. Just 2 people existing in the same space, doing what needed doing. When she finished, Caleb set 2 plates on the table. Salt pork, beans, and something that might have been bread once upon a time. You didn't have to cook for me, Elena said. You worked all day fixing Dutch's wagon, then rode 12 miles in a supply wagon, then argued your way into a job. You need to eat. It was the most words he'd strung together since she'd arrived. Elena sat, picked up her fork, and discovered she was starving. The food was terrible. Oversalted pork, beans that had been cooked to mush, bread that could double as a weapon. But it was food, and she'd learned not to be picky. They ate in silence. Caleb worked through his plate with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd stopped tasting food a long time ago. When he finished, he stood, took his plate to the basin. 6 o'clock, he said. Don't be late. Then he was gone, boots heavy on the stairs, a door closing somewhere above. Elena sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere outside, a coyote called. The wind picked up, rattling the window frames. She should feel lonely, isolated. Instead, she felt something that might have been purpose. Tomorrow, she'd start fixing this place. The porch, the windows, the meals, whatever needed doing. She'd make herself indispensable. Not because she needed Caleb Rourke's approval, but because she needed to prove, to herself more than anyone, that she could build something from nothing, that she could take broken things and make them whole, starting with herself. Elena woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was dark and cold. She lit a lamp, got the stove going, and started exploring. The pantry was a disaster. Supplies thrown together with no organization, half-empty sacks of flour crawling with weevils, beans that should have been thrown out months ago. The root cellar was better, but still chaotic. Potatoes and onions mixed together, carrots going soft, no system to anything. She found coffee, real coffee, surprisingly, and got a pot brewing. Then she started pulling everything out of the pantry, sorting salvageable from garbage, making mental lists of what needed replacing. Footsteps on the stairs. Caleb appeared in the doorway, hair damp like he'd just washed, expression wary. "You're up early," he said. "You said 6 o'clock. It's 5:30. He moved past her to pour coffee, black and strong. Took a sip, and some of the tension left his shoulders. At least she'd done that right. "Your pantry's a mess," Elena said. "I know. Half of it needs to be thrown out." "I know. When's the last time you organized anything in there?" Caleb stared into his coffee cup. "Before Sarah died." The name hung in the air between them. Sarah, his wife. The woman who'd made curtains for the upstairs room, who'd probably kept this house running, who'd left a hole so big that Caleb had just stopped trying. "I'll clean it today," Elena said. "Make a list of what you need. Dutch said he comes by once a week." "Thursdays." "Good. I'll have the list ready." Caleb nodded, still not looking at her. "I'll be working the north pasture today. Probably won't be back until dinner." 7 o'clock. "Right." He drained his coffee, set the cup in the basin, and headed for the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. "Elena." It was the first time he'd used her name. She looked up. "Thank you," he said. "For this." Then he was gone before she could respond. Elena stood in the kitchen as the sun started to break over the prairie, warming the room in shades of gold. She poured herself coffee, took a sip, and started planning her day. Clean the pantry, organize the root cellar, wash windows, fix the porch if she could find the materials. Cook a decent dinner. Make this house feel lived in again. She could do this. She could fix this broken place, make it into something that worked, something that mattered. And maybe, in the process, she'd fix herself too. The coffee was bitter and perfect. Elena smiled into her cup and got to work. By noon, she'd transformed the pantry from chaos into order. Everything labeled, organized by type, weevil-infested supplies disposed of in the burn pile outside. The root cellar took another hour, but by the time she finished, she could actually see what Caleb had and what he needed. The list was long. Flour, sugar, decent coffee, preserved fruit, vegetables that weren't half rotten, soap for laundry, oil for the lamps, fabric for, well, for everything. This whole house needed mending. She washed windows until her arms ached, until she could actually see clearly out of them. The difference was startling. Suddenly the house felt lighter, less like a tomb. The porch was trickier. The support beam on the left side had rotted through, and the boards were warping. She'd need proper lumber to fix it right, but she could at least stabilize it temporarily with some of the scrap wood she'd found in the barn. She was on her hands and knees prying up rotten boards when a voice made her jump. "Well, aren't you industrious?" Elena looked up. A woman stood at the edge of the porch, maybe 35, dressed in clothes that were too fine for ranch country. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her hands soft and clean. She looked at Elena the way you might look at something tracked in on your boots. "Can I help you?" Elena asked, sitting back on her heels. "I'm Victoria Brennan. I own the general store in town." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I heard Caleb had hired help. I wanted to meet you." "Elena Mercer." "Where are you from, Miss Mercer?" "Pennsylvania." "Long way from home." Victoria's gaze swept over Elena's work dress, her dirty hands, the tools scattered around her. "And you're working as a housekeeper?" Something in her tone made Elena's spine straighten. "Among other things." "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday." "My, you work fast." Victoria stepped onto the porch, careful to avoid the torn-up boards. "I should warn you, Miss Mercer. This is a small community, people talk, and a young, unmarried woman living alone with a man, well, it raises questions." "Then maybe people should mind their own business." Victoria's smile went sharp. "I'm trying to help you. Caleb Rourke is a good man, but he's damaged. His wife's death broke something in him. Whatever you're hoping might develop here, I'm hoping dinner gets cooked and the porch doesn't collapse. That's all." "Of course," Victoria's tone said she didn't believe a word of it. "Well, I just wanted to introduce myself. Welcome to the territory, Miss Mercer. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other around." She left in a rustle of skirts, climbing into a buggy that was far too nice for the rough prairie roads. Elena watched her go, anger coiling in her gut. She knew that type. The woman who smiled while sliding knives between your ribs. The one who'd spread poison dressed up as concern. Let her talk. Elena had work to do. Aunt. Dinner was ready at exactly 7 o'clock. Real food this time. Roasted chicken from the coop Caleb apparently didn't know how to use, potatoes from the root cellar, gravy made from pan drippings, and the last of the decent flour. Biscuits that were almost respectable. Caleb came in dusty and tired, pulled up short when he smelled the food. "You cooked," he said, like this was a revelation. "You hired a housekeeper. We keep houses. It's in the name." He washed up at the pump, sat down at the table without a word. Elena served him, then herself, and they ate in the now familiar silence. She watched him take the first bite, saw his eyes close briefly, something shifting in his expression that might have been grief or relief or both. "This is good," he said quietly. "It's adequate. I'll do better when I can get supplies. Dutch comes Thursday." "I have a list." Caleb nodded, worked through his plate with slightly less mechanical efficiency than the night before. When he reached for a second biscuit, Elena counted it as a victory. "Had a visitor today," she said. "Victoria Brennan." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What did she want?" "To warn me that people will talk. About me being here. Unmarried woman, widowed man. Apparently that's scandalous. Victoria is a gossip and a busybody. Ignore her." "I plan to." Elena cut into her chicken. "She seemed to think I was here because I had designs on you." Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Christ, as if either of us needs that complication." "My thoughts exactly." They ate in silence for a bit. Then Caleb said, "You don't have to worry about the talk. Far as I'm concerned, you're my employee, that's all. Anyone says different, they answer to me. I can fight my own battles." "I don't doubt it, but you shouldn't have to." He met her eyes across the table. "This is a job. A business arrangement. Nothing more, nothing less." Agreed. Something eased in the room, a tension neither of them had acknowledged disappearing. They finished dinner, and Caleb actually helped clear the plates this time. "The porch looks better," he said, glancing toward the front door. "It's temporary. I need lumber to fix it properly. There's a sawmill about 15 miles west. I can take the wagon next week. Bring back what you need. I can give you measurements tomorrow." Caleb nodded, hesitated. "Elena, the work you did today, the pantry, the windows, the food, it's..." He struggled for words. "Sarah used to say a house is just a building until someone makes it a home. I forgot that. These past 2 years I've been living in a building. And now? Now it smells like biscuits instead of defeat. That's a start. He left before she could respond, disappearing upstairs to wherever he spent his evenings. Elena stood in the kitchen, surrounded by clean dishes and organized shelves and windows that let in light. She thought about Thomas, about the crossroads, about every choice that had led her here. She didn't regret a single one. Outside, the prairie stretched into darkness, vast and unknowable. But inside this house, there was light, there was order, there was purpose. And for the first time in a long time, Elena Mercer felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She dried the last dish, hung up the towel, and went upstairs to her small, clean room. Tomorrow she'd keep fixing things, keep making this house work, keep proving she was more than what Thomas had left behind. But tonight she'd sleep, and she'd dream of solid ground instead of dusty crossroads, of foundations instead of broken promises, of building instead of waiting. And that, she thought as she drifted off, was more than enough. The days developed a rhythm. Elena woke before dawn, got the stove going, made coffee that Caleb drank in silence before disappearing into the fields. She'd spend the morning working through her mental list, mending curtains, scrubbing floors, reorganizing storage spaces that hadn't been touched in years. Afternoons were for bigger projects, the kind that required her father's tools and the stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be fixed. By the end of the first week, she'd repaired 3 chairs, replaced the rope on the well bucket, and patched a leak in the roof that Caleb had apparently been ignoring for months. The house was starting to look less like a place where someone had given up and more like somewhere a person might actually want to live. Thursday came, and Dutch arrived with his wagon right on schedule. Elena met him at the barn with her list, neatly written and organized by priority. Dutch whistled when he read it. "You planning to run a hotel?" "I'm planning to run a household that doesn't survive on salt, pork, and beans." "Fair enough." He folded the list into his pocket. "I'll have most of this by next week. Some items might take longer, the fabric, the lamp oil. Supply routes out here are unpredictable. Just do what you can." Dutch glanced toward the house, taking in the clean windows, the stabilized porch, the general air of things being tended to. "Place looks different already. It was falling apart." Wasn't talking about the place. He tipped his hat and climbed back onto his wagon. "Boss seems different too, less like a ghost haunting his own property." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Dutch left with a wave, and she went back to work. That evening, Caleb came in earlier than usual. He washed up at the pump, poured himself coffee, and sat at the table while Elena finished cooking. "Had a talk with Dutch," he said. "He get the list?" "He did. Also mentioned you've been working on the roof." Elena set a pot on the stove. There was a leak above the spare bedroom. It needed fixing. "That's dangerous work. You should have told me. You were busy with the cattle." "I'm never too busy to prevent you from breaking your neck." She turned to face him. He looked genuinely concerned, which was strange. Thomas had never worried about her safety, had mostly seemed annoyed when she did anything he considered men's work. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "That's not the point. The point is—" Caleb stopped, rubbed his face. "Look, you're doing good work, better than good, but you don't have to do everything yourself. Neither do you, but that hasn't stopped you." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Touché." They ate dinner, and afterward Caleb didn't immediately disappear upstairs. Instead, he pulled out a leather-bound ledger and spread it on the table. "I need help with something," he said. Elena sat down across from him. "What is it?" "The accounts. They're a mess. Sarah used to handle all of this, ordering supplies, tracking expenses, managing the money. After she died, I couldn't look at it. Her handwriting was all over these pages, and every time I tried, He stopped, cleared his throat. "Anyway, I haven't balanced anything in almost 2 years. I have no idea if I'm making money or losing it." Elena pulled the ledger toward her. Sarah's handwriting was neat and precise, the entries carefully organized, but they stopped abruptly in July 2 years ago. Everything after that was chaos, Caleb's cramped scrawl, numbers that didn't add up, entries crossed out and rewritten. "This is bad," Elena said. "I know." "No, I mean, this is really bad. You've got expenses listed twice, income that's not recorded anywhere, purchases with no corresponding inventory. How have you not gone bankrupt?" Caleb leaned back in his chair. "Honestly, no idea. I just keep working and hoping the numbers sort themselves out." Numbers don't sort themselves out, they just get worse until you can't ignore them anymore. Which is why I'm asking for help. Elena studied him. This wasn't easy for him, admitting he needed her, showing her this weakness. She could see it in the tension in his shoulders, the way he wasn't quite meeting her eyes. I'll need to go through everything, she said. Every receipt, every transaction. It's going to take time. I've got nothing but time. And I'll need to ask you questions, lots of them, about purchases you've made, sales you've completed, where the money went. Fine. Some of the answers might make you look like you don't know what you're doing. Caleb almost laughed. I don't know what I'm doing. That's the whole problem. Elena nodded. Then we'll figure it out together. They worked until midnight, going through receipts and invoices, trying to piece together 2 years of financial chaos. It was tedious, frustrating work. More than once, Caleb swore and looked like he wanted to throw the whole ledger into the stove. But he kept at it, answered her questions, helped her sort through the mess. By the time they stopped, Elena's eyes were burning and her head ached. But she'd made progress. She had a clearer picture of what Caleb owned, what he owed, where the money was going. It's not as bad as I thought, she said, rubbing her temples. That's good news? The ranch is profitable. Barely. You're spending too much on supplies because you're buying from whoever shows up instead of finding the best prices. And you sold off cattle last year for about half what they were worth. Caleb winced. That was a bad deal. I knew it at the time, but I needed the cash fast. Why? Dr. Bill's Sarah was sick for 3 months before she died. I spent everything trying to save her. The room went quiet. Elena looked at him, this hard, closed-off man who'd bankrupted himself trying to keep his wife alive, who'd let his whole world fall apart when it hadn't been enough. I'm sorry, she said. Yeah, me too. He stood, gathered the papers. But thank you for this, for looking at it without judgment. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help. After he went upstairs, Elena sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about loss and numbers and the ways people tried to hold themselves together when everything was breaking. She thought about Thomas, who'd walked away the moment things got difficult. And she thought about Caleb, who'd stayed and fought and bled himself dry trying to save what mattered. There was no comparison, really. She blew out the lamp and went to bed. The next morning, she started reorganizing Caleb's purchasing system. When Dutch arrived the following Thursday, she had a detailed order ready. Not just what they needed, but where to get it cheapest, which suppliers to use, how to negotiate better prices. Dutch looked impressed and slightly terrified. You're going to put me out of business. I'm going to make you more efficient, which means Caleb pays you the same for less work. Or I use the extra time to pick up more clients. There you go. The supplies came in better quality and lower cost than anything Caleb had managed in 2 years. Elena organized everything with ruthless efficiency. Pantry restocked and labeled, root cellar properly maintained, equipment stored where it could be found. The house started to transform. Not into something fancy, but into something functional. Something that worked. 3 weeks in, Elena was mending a broken cabinet door when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. She set down her tools and walked to the front window. Victoria Brennan was climbing down from her buggy, accompanied by 2 other women Elena didn't recognize. All 3 were dressed like they were attending a church social, not visiting a working ranch. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door before they could knock. Mrs. Brennan, she said. Ladies? Miss Mercer. Victoria's smile was pure sugar and poison. I hope we're not intruding. We wanted to stop by and see how you're settling in. I'm settled. Thank you for asking. Wonderful. These are my friends, Mrs. Claudia Pearson and Miss Margaret Chen. We represent the Ladies' Improvement Society. The women nodded in greeting. Mrs. Pearson looked kind but wary. Miss Chen's expression was carefully neutral. We help newcomers adjust to life in the territory, Victoria continued. Make sure they understand local customs, introduce them to the community, that sort of thing. That's kind of you, but unnecessary. Oh, but we insist. May we come in? It wasn't really a question. Elena stepped aside and let them enter. The 3 women filed into the kitchen, taking in the clean floors, the organized pantry, the general sense of order. Victoria's smile tightened slightly. My, you have been busy, she said. That's what I'm paid for. Of course. Though I must say, it's unusual for a housekeeper to take on quite so much responsibility. Most would simply cook and clean, not reorganize the entire household. Most housekeepers probably weren't trained as carpenters and bookkeepers. Mrs. Pearson's eyebrows rose. You know bookkeeping? Among other things. How versatile. Victoria wandered over to the table where the account ledgers still sat from the previous night's work. I hope Mr. Rourke appreciates all you're doing for him. The implication was clear. Elena felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. Mr. Rourke pays me fair wages for fair work. That's all the appreciation I need. Naturally, though people do talk, you understand. A young woman, alone with a man, living under the same roof. It raises eyebrows. Then perhaps people should find something more interesting to occupy their time. Miss Chen made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Victoria shot her a look. We're not trying to offend you, Miss Mercer, Mrs. Pearson said gently. But this is a small community. Reputations matter, a woman's reputation especially. My reputation is my own concern. But it affects all of us, Victoria said. When one woman behaves improperly, it reflects poorly on all women in the territory. Surely you can understand that. Elena crossed her arms. What exactly are you suggesting I'm doing improperly? Well, nothing yet, of course. We're simply encouraging you to be mindful of appearances. Perhaps attend church services in town, participate in community events. Make it clear that your arrangement here is strictly professional. My arrangement is strictly professional. I don't need to perform for anyone to prove it. It's not about performing. Yes, it is. It's about you deciding what's proper and then demanding everyone else conform to your standards. Elena kept her voice steady, but she was done being polite. I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm here to work. If people want to gossip, that's their choice. But I'm not going to change how I live to stop them. Victoria's expression went cold. That's a very foolish attitude, Miss Mercer. In a place like this, you need the community's goodwill to survive. I'll take my chances. The women left shortly after, Victoria's goodbye dripping with false sweetness. Mrs. Pearson gave Elena an apologetic look. Miss Chen said nothing, but her slight nod felt like approval. Elena watched them drive away, anger still simmering in her chest. That evening, she told Caleb about the visit. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. When she finished, he set down his fork with careful precision. Victoria Brennan is a meddling busybody who's been trying to run this town like her personal kingdom for 15 years, he said. She's also bitter as hell that I never paid attention to her after Sarah died. She was interested in you? She made it known. Brought casseroles, offered to help with the household, showed up at inconvenient times wearing her Sunday best. I told her I wasn't interested. She didn't take it well. So this is revenge? This is Victoria being Victoria. She can't stand not being the center of everything. Caleb picked up his fork again. Don't let her get to you. She's all noise. She said I need the community's goodwill. You need a roof and food and honest work. Everything else is negotiable. Elena wanted to believe that, but she'd seen how communities could turn on people, how quickly whispers became weapons. She'd watched it happen back home, seen women destroyed by nothing more than persistent gossip. What if she's right? Elena asked. What if people start talking and it affects your business? I don't want to make things harder for you. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Anyone who'd stop doing business with me because I hired a competent housekeeper is someone I don't want to do business with anyway. That's easy to say now. It's easy to say because it's true. He stood, carried his plate to the basin. You're doing good work here, Elena. Real work. Don't let Victoria's nonsense make you question that. But after he went upstairs, Elena sat in the kitchen and wondered if she'd made a mistake. Not in taking the job, that still felt right, but in underestimating how hard people would work to tear down what she was building. She'd thought running from Thomas was the hard part. Turns out, standing still and defending what you'd made was harder. The next Sunday, Caleb surprised her by hitching up the wagon. We're going to town, he said. Why? Church service, community gathering afterward. Elena stared at him. You hate those things. I do. But if we don't show up, Victoria wins. She gets to control the narrative, tell everyone whatever version of events suits her. So we're going to prove we have nothing to hide. Exactly. The ride to town was quiet. Elena wore her best dress, which still wasn't much. Caleb had put on clean clothes and actually combed his hair. They looked like what they were. Working people making an effort. The church was small but well-maintained, sitting at the center of town like everything else revolved around it. People were already gathering outside, talking in clusters. Conversations died when Caleb's wagon approached. Elena felt every eye on her as she climbed down, heard the whispers starting, spreading like ripples in water. Caleb offered his arm. She took it, and they walked into that church together with their heads up. Inside, they sat in a middle pew. Not too far back, not too far forward. Victoria sat 3 rows ahead with her friends, her posture radiating disapproval. The service was long and uncomfortable. Elena could feel people staring, judging, making assessments. She kept her expression neutral and tried to focus on anything else. Afterward, the community gathering was worse. Long tables set up outside, food laid out, everyone pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Mrs. Pearson approached them first, kind eyes and careful words. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Rourke, I'm glad you came." "Seemed like the right thing to do," Caleb said. "It was. I hope you'll both feel welcome here." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Other people followed her lead. Not everyone, but enough. A rancher named Patterson asked Caleb about cattle prices. His wife complimented Elena's organizational skills, mentioned she'd heard about the bookkeeping from Dutch. "The territory needs more women who aren't afraid of numbers," Mrs. Patterson said. "Too many rely on their husbands for everything and end up lost when they're left alone." Miss Chen joined their conversation, sharing her own story about taking over her family's dry goods business when her father died. "People said it wasn't proper for a woman to run a store. I told them they were welcome to starve if they felt that strongly about it." Elena laughed despite herself, found herself relaxing slightly, talking to these women who understood what it meant to carve out space in a world that didn't particularly want you to have any. Victoria watched from across the yard, surrounded by her loyalists, radiating disapproval. Let her watch, Elena thought. Let her disapprove. It changed nothing. On the ride home, Caleb was quiet but less tense. "That wasn't as bad as I thought it would be," he said finally. "You were expecting worse?" "I was expecting Victoria to make a scene, demand I fire you on moral grounds or some such nonsense. She's too smart for that. Public confrontation makes her look petty. So instead she'll wage a quiet campaign to make your life miserable." "Probably." Elena watched the prairie roll past. "I can handle it. I know you can. But you shouldn't have to." They didn't talk the rest of the way home, but something had shifted between them, some understanding that they were in this together now, whether they'd planned it or not. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house creak around her, thinking about community and reputation and the exhausting work of proving you belonged somewhere. She thought about Thomas, too. Wondered if he'd made it to California, if he ever thought about her, if he felt even a flicker of guilt for what he'd done. Probably not. Men like Thomas didn't feel guilt. They felt entitled to their choices and baffled when anyone questioned them. A noise from downstairs pulled her from her thoughts. Footsteps. The creak of a floorboard. Caleb probably, restless the same way she was. Elena got up, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and went downstairs. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the account ledgers spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered, not surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Not really. You?" "Never could after social events. Too many people, too much noise. Takes me hours to settle." Elena sat down across from him. "Sarah was better at that stuff, I'm guessing." "Sarah could charm anyone. She'd walk into a room and people would just light up." He ran his hand over one of the ledger pages, tracing his late wife's handwriting. "She made everything easier. When she died, I realized how much I'd relied on her for dealing with the world." "Is that why you stopped going to town?" "Partly. Also couldn't stand the pity. Everyone looking at me like I was broken, offering help I didn't want, trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. And now? Now I've got bigger problems than their pity. Like keeping this ranch running, making sure the numbers actually work." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "Thank you for coming today. I know it wasn't easy." "You came too. That took more courage." "Did it? You've been hiding out here for 2 years. Showing up today, facing all of them, that was brave." Caleb shook his head. "Wasn't brave. Was just tired of letting Victoria Brennan dictate my life. Same thing, sometimes. He smiled, small but real. Maybe. Elena stood, tightened her shawl. Try to get some sleep. We've got work tomorrow. Always do. Back in her room, Elena lay down, and this time sleep came easier. She dreamed of numbers that added up right, of houses that didn't fall apart, of standing in front of people and not caring what they thought. When she woke, the sun was already breaking over the prairie, painting everything gold. Time to get to work. The weeks that followed settled into something Elena hadn't expected. Stability. Not the kind she'd imagined with Thomas, all promises and plans that evaporated under scrutiny. This was different, tangible. Each morning she woke knowing exactly what needed doing, and each evening she could see the evidence of her work. The ranch's finances were slowly crawling out of chaos. She'd created a new system, simple enough for Caleb to maintain, detailed enough to catch problems before they became catastrophes. Every purchase recorded, every sale documented, every expense justified. It was boring, methodical work, but watching the numbers finally make sense gave her a satisfaction she hadn't felt in years. Caleb noticed. He didn't say much. That wasn't his way, but she'd catch him studying the ledgers with something that looked like relief. Once he'd muttered, "Didn't realize how much money I was bleeding until you showed me where it was going." "You were buying fence wire from Patterson at twice what it should cost," Elena had said. "He's a neighbor. I thought I was supporting local business." "You were supporting his new addition and his wife's expensive tastes. There's a supplier 2 towns over selling the same quality for half the price." Caleb had laughed, short and sharp. Sarah would have caught that in a heartbeat. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife without pain cracking his voice. Elena had taken it as progress. But progress, she was learning, made some people nervous. Victoria Brennan's campaign was subtle but persistent, nothing direct. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it was whispered conversations that stopped when Elena entered the general store. Invitations to community events that somehow never reached her. Women who'd been friendly at the church gathering suddenly finding reasons to keep their distance. Mrs. Patterson stayed kind, and Miss Chen remained cordial, but even they seemed careful. Like associating too closely with Elena might contaminate them. Elena told herself it didn't matter. She had work. She had purpose. She didn't need their approval. But some nights, lying in her narrow bed, she felt the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. 6 weeks in, Dutch arrived with the weekly supplies and a worried expression. "Got something you need to hear," he said, glancing toward where Caleb was working in the north pasture. "Might want to sit down." Elena set down the crate she'd been unpacking. "What is it?" "There's talk in town about the ranch's accounts." "What kind of talk?" Dutch shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria's been telling people that you've taken over the finances, that Caleb's let you have full access to his money, his records, everything. She's suggesting that maybe you're not as honest as you appear." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "She's saying I'm stealing from him?" Not in those exact words. She's too smart for that. But she's planting seeds, asking questions. "Don't you think it's strange that he trusts a complete stranger with everything? What do we really know about this woman? Where did she come from?" "I came from Pennsylvania. I've told people that." "They want details you haven't given, and the fact that you haven't given them makes them suspicious." Dutch looked genuinely distressed. "I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying you need to be careful. If this gets out of hand, it won't." "Elena, I have nothing to hide. The accounts are clean. Every transaction is documented. If anyone wants to see the books, they're welcome to look." "That's not the point. The point is, in a place like this, reputation matters more than truth. Victoria's poisoning the well, and unless you do something, I'm not going to defend myself against gossip." Dutch sighed. "Then at least tell Caleb. He should know what's being said." After Dutch left, Elena stood in the barn and tried to decide what to do. She could tell Caleb, watch him get angry, maybe make things worse. Or she could handle this herself, prove through her work that Victoria's insinuations were baseless. She was still debating when Caleb came in from the fields, dusty and tired. "Dutch seem worried to you?" he asked, washing his hands at the pump. So much for keeping it from him. "He had some news." "About?" Elena told him, watched his expression go from confused to angry to something harder and colder. That vindictive... He stopped himself, took a breath. She can't just accuse you of theft. She's not accusing, she's suggesting. There's a difference. Not one that matters. Caleb dried his hands roughly. I'll go to town tomorrow, set the record straight. That'll make it worse. You defending me just confirms what she's saying, that we're too close, that I've manipulated you somehow. So what do you suggest? We just let her spread lies? I suggest we ignore it. Keep doing what we're doing. Let the work speak for itself. Caleb shook his head. That's not enough. Not with Victoria. Then what is enough? What do you want me to do? Leave. The word hung between them. Elena hadn't meant to say it, but now that it was out there, it felt inevitable. Of course that was the solution. Remove the problem, remove her, and everything would go back to normal. No, Caleb said, quiet but firm. That's not what I want. Then what? He didn't answer right away, just stood there, jaw working like he was trying to solve an equation that wouldn't balance. Finally, he said, I'll think of something. That night, Elena couldn't eat. She pushed food around her plate while Caleb did the same, both of them lost in separate thoughts that led to the same uncomfortable conclusion. She'd become a liability, not through any fault of her own, but simply by existing in a space Victoria Brennan had decided she didn't belong. After dinner, instead of working on the accounts, Caleb pulled out a bottle of whiskey Elena hadn't known he owned. He poured 2 glasses without asking if she wanted one. Sarah hated this stuff, he said, sliding a glass across the table. Said it turned men into fools. Did it? Sometimes. But sometimes it just made things a little easier to look at. He took a sip, grimaced. She was right, though. It does make you a fool. I drank myself stupid for 6 months after she died, thinking it would help. It didn't. Elena sipped her own glass. The whiskey burned going down, harsh and unforgiving. Why'd you stop? Woke up one morning face down in the barn, horses looking at me like I was pathetic. Realized I could either drink myself to death or figure out how to live. Chose living, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to. And now? Now I'm glad I made that choice, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been here when you showed up fixing Dutch's wagon. He looked at her across the table. You saved that man 3 days of being stranded. You know that? It was just a broken axle. It was competence, initiative, the kind of thing that separates people who wait for life to happen from people who make it happen. Caleb refilled his glass. When you showed up here, I thought you were desperate. Someone running from something, willing to take any job to avoid going back. I was desperate. But that's not all you were. You were also capable, smart, willing to work. I've had 3 housekeepers since Sarah died, and none of them lasted more than 2 weeks. You know why? Elena shook her head. Because they wanted to fix me. Thought if they could just be kind enough, patient enough, I'd wake up and realize I needed a wife. His voice was bitter. They saw a broken man and a chance to play savior. You saw a broken porch and a chance to earn fair wages. I'm not interested in fixing people, Elena said. Just things. I know. That's why you're still here. They drank in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, I'm not going to let Victoria run you off. You understand that? This isn't your fight. It became my fight when she started spreading lies about someone under my roof. He set down his glass. I've been thinking about how to handle this, about what would actually shut her up. There's nothing that'll shut her up. She's decided I'm a threat, and she won't stop until I'm gone. Unless you're not a threat anymore. Elena frowned. What does that mean? Caleb stood, paced to the window, looked out at the dark prairie. Victoria's problem isn't actually with you, it's with what you represent. Uncertainty, impropriety, a situation she can't control. If we remove that uncertainty, I'm not following. He turned to face her. What if we made it official, legal, something no one could question? Elena's stomach dropped. You're not suggesting a partnership, business partnership, equal shares in the ranch, documented and filed with the territory. You're not my employee anymore. You're my partner. Equal stake, equal say, equal ownership. She stared at him. That's insane. Why? Because we barely know each other. Because I've been here less than 2 months. Because you can't just give someone half your ranch. I'm not giving you anything. You've earned it. Caleb crossed his arms. You've saved me money, fixed things I'd let rot, brought order to chaos. The ranch is worth more now than when you arrived. That's not charity, that's return on investment. People will say you're being manipulated, that I seduced you or tricked you. Let them. Once it's legal and filed, their opinions don't matter. They can't claim you're here improperly if you own half the property. Elena's mind raced. It was a bold solution, maybe too bold, but she couldn't deny the logic. A legal partnership would be undeniable proof that she belonged here, that her role was legitimate. What about you? She asked. You'd be giving up half your ranch to someone you met 6 weeks ago. That's not smart business. Smartest thing I've done in 2 years. Caleb came back to the table, sat down. Sarah and I built this place together. Equal partners, even if the deed only had my name. When she died, I lost my partner and I lost my way. Maybe I need a partner again, not a wife, just someone who sees the work that needs doing and does it. This is too much. It's exactly enough. He met her eyes, steady and certain. I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking for anything except that you keep doing what you're already doing. The only difference is you'll own what you build instead of just maintaining it. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to argue that this was reckless, that he was making a decision based on anger at Victoria rather than sound judgment. But another part of her, the part that had sat at that crossroads and decided to stop waiting for someone else to give her a future, understood exactly what he was offering. Not rescue, not charity, not even affection. Opportunity, agency, proof. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. But know this, I'm serious. I've already drafted the papers. They're sitting in my desk upstairs. All they need is your signature and a trip to the land office. After Caleb went to bed, Elena sat alone with the whiskey bottle in her thoughts. She poured herself another glass, then another, trying to think through the implications. A partnership would solve the immediate problem. Victoria couldn't call her a scheming housekeeper if she was a legal landowner. But it would create new complications. People would talk anyway, would find other ways to criticize, other angles to attack. And what happened if she wanted to leave? What if, a year from now, she decided this life wasn't what she wanted? She'd be tied to this ranch, to Caleb, to a decision made in anger and whiskey. But wasn't that always the risk? Every choice carried consequences. She'd learned that with Thomas. The difference was, this time she'd be choosing with clear eyes, not following someone else's plan, but building her own. She found the draft papers in Caleb's desk, read them by lamplight. They were straightforward, professionally worded. Equal ownership of all ranch assets, land, livestock, equipment, accounts. Equal responsibility for debts and expenses. Either party could buy out the other with 6 months' notice, valuation to be determined by independent assessor. It was fair, more than fair. It was the kind of partnership her father had always said was the foundation of good business. Clear terms, mutual benefit, escape clauses if things went wrong. Elena read the papers 3 times, looking for traps or hidden obligations. Found none. By the time dawn started breaking, she'd made her decision. She found Caleb in his barn, already working though the sun was barely up. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. I'll do it, she said without preamble. He straightened, studied her face. You're sure? I'm sure that sitting still and hoping Victoria gets bored won't work. I'm sure that I've earned a stake in what I've built here. And I'm sure that if I don't take this chance, I'll regret it. She pulled the papers from her pocket. Where do we sign? Caleb's expression shifted. Relief, satisfaction, something that might have been respect. Kitchen table, I've got a pen and ink. They signed that morning, both of them still in their work clothes, Elena's signature slightly shaky from lack of sleep and whiskey residue. Caleb's was bold and certain, no hesitation. We'll take it to the land office today, he said. Get it filed and recorded before anyone can interfere. Victoria's going to lose her mind. Good. Maybe it'll teach her to mind her own business. The ride to town was tense. Elena kept the papers tucked inside her coat, half expecting them to disappear or catch fire, or somehow prove to be a mistake. But they stayed solid and real, proof of a decision that couldn't be undone. The land office was a small building near the center of town, run by a man named Harrison, who looked perpetually exhausted. He took the papers without comment, read them carefully, then looked up at Caleb with raised eyebrows. Partnership? He asked. That's right. This is unusual. Legal, though, isn't it? Harrison consulted a thick book of territorial regulations. Legal? Yes. Unusual? Definitely. He looked at Elena. You understand what you're signing, Miss Mercer. This makes you equally responsible for all ranch debts and obligations. I understand. And you, Mr. Rourke, you're aware you're giving up sole ownership of property you've held for 15 years? I'm aware. Harrison shrugged. Your business, I suppose. I'll need to file this with the territorial registry, which takes about a week. Once it's recorded, it becomes official. How long until people can see it? Caleb asked. Public record, so immediately. Anyone can come in and request to see filed documents. Perfect. They left the land office and walked directly to the general store. Victoria was behind the counter, helping a customer, but her eyes locked on them the moment they entered. Mr. Rourke, she said, syrupy sweet. Miss Mercer, how unexpected. We're here to order supplies, Caleb said, and to let you know that you can stop spreading rumors about Miss Mercer's position at the ranch. Victoria's smile froze. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm sure you do. So let me be clear. Miss Mercer is no longer my employee. As of this morning, she's my business partner. Equal shares, legal, and filed with the territory. The customer, Mrs. Patterson, inhaled sharply. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red. That's highly irregular, Victoria managed. It's perfectly legal. Harrison at the land office can confirm it. Caleb pulled out a list. Now, we need these supplies by Thursday. Can you manage that, or should we take our business to the store 2 towns over? Victoria took the list with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the items, but Elena could tell she wasn't really seeing them. She was calculating, trying to figure out how this changed things, what it meant. I'll have everything ready, she said stiffly. Appreciate it. They left Victoria standing there speechless for maybe the first time in her life. Outside, Mrs. Patterson caught up with them. Is it true? About the partnership? Filed this morning, Elena said. Mrs. Patterson's face broke into a genuine smile. Well, that's one way to handle Victoria's nonsense. She lowered her voice. For what it's worth, I think it's brilliant. She can't very well question your propriety when you're a legal landowner. That was the idea. She'll find another angle. She always does. But at least this one's closed. Mrs. Patterson squeezed Elena's arm. Welcome to the community, Miss Mercer. Properly, this time. The news spread faster than Elena had anticipated. By evening, 3 neighbors had stopped by the ranch, ostensibly to discuss cattle prices or fence repairs, but really to satisfy their curiosity. Caleb handled them with his usual blunt honesty, confirming the partnership and refusing to elaborate on why or how. Business decision, he told Patterson, the rancher who'd been overcharging him for fence wire. Miss Mercer's got a head for numbers and I don't. Seemed fair to make it official. Awful trusting of you. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally doing something smart. Elena watched from the kitchen window as the visitors came and went, studying her like she was some kind of exotic creature. Let them look. Let them wonder. She had the papers to prove she belonged here now. That night, she and Caleb worked on the accounts together, but the dynamic had shifted. Before, it had been employer and employee. Now it was partners, each with equal stake in making the numbers work. We need to sell the older cattle soon, Elena said, pointing to her calculations. Before winter. The feed costs are eating our profits. I know. I've been putting it off. Why? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Sarah and I bought some of those animals together. Our first year here. Stupid to be sentimental about livestock, but it's not stupid. It's impractical. They're old. They're expensive to maintain, and selling them makes financial sense. But you're not ready. I wasn't, but I am now. He made a note on the ledger. We'll sell them next month. Get the best price we can. It was a small thing, but it felt significant, like Caleb was finally letting go of something he'd been holding on to too tightly. Elena updated the inventory, cross-referenced it with current market prices, calculated their expected profit. The numbers were good. Better than good. If they sold at the right time, they'd clear enough to repair the barn roof and still have money left over. We're going to be all right, she said, surprised by how much she meant the we. Caleb looked at the numbers, then at her. Yeah, I think we are. The week waiting for the partnership to be officially recorded felt longer than the previous 6 weeks combined. Elena threw herself into work, reorganizing the tack room, repairing harnesses, planning next season's planting schedule. Anything to avoid thinking too hard about what she'd done. She'd tied herself to this place. To Caleb. To a future that was still uncertain but at least belonged to her. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first decision she'd made in years that was entirely her own. Dutch arrived on Thursday with supplies and news. "Whole town's talking about you two," he said, unloading crates. "Half of them think you're brilliant. Other half think you've lost your minds." "Which half are you in?" Caleb asked. "The half that minds my own business and delivers supplies." Dutch grinned. "But between us, I think it's about damn time someone put Victoria in her place." "How's she taking it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Lots of tight smiles and comments about unconventional arrangements. But she can't actually say anything now. You've beaten her at her own game." After Dutch left, Elena opened the supply crates and found everything on her list, plus something extra, a bolt of good fabric, the kind used for making dresses. Tucked inside was a note in Mrs. Patterson's handwriting. "For the new landowner, welcome to the territory." Elena stood there holding the fabric, surprised to feel tears pricking her eyes. She'd been so focused on defending her position, proving she belonged, that she'd forgotten some people might actually be happy for her. That evening, she showed the fabric to Caleb. "That was kind of her," he said. "Yeah, it was." "You should make yourself something nice. Partnership celebration." "I don't need anything nice." "Maybe not, but you've earned it." He went back to his coffee. "Sarah used to say that women in the territory worked twice as hard as men and got half the recognition. She'd be glad to see you getting your due." It was the most Caleb had ever said about his wife in one sitting. Elena didn't know how to respond, so she just folded the fabric carefully and set it aside. Later, lying in bed, she thought about Sarah Rourke, the woman whose curtains still hung in the windows, whose handwriting filled the old ledgers, whose absence had shaped everything about this place. She wondered what Sarah would think of this arrangement, of Elena stepping into a role that was nothing like what Sarah had filled but somehow parallel to it. She hoped Sarah would approve, hoped that somewhere, somehow, she'd understand. The official partnership papers arrived the following week, stamped and recorded, undeniable proof of Elena's new status. She held them in her hands and felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her like a physical thing. She owned this land now. These buildings, these cattle, this future. It was hers as much as Caleb's. And for the first time since that crossroads, Elena Mercer felt like she'd found solid ground. The partnership papers sat in Elena's trunk for 3 days before she could bring herself to look at them again. Not because she regretted signing, she didn't, but because seeing her name next to Caleb's in official territorial record made everything real in a way that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She'd stopped being a woman who fixed a stranger's wagon at a crossroads. Now she was a landowner, a rancher, someone with stake and standing and something to lose. The thought kept her up at night. But the work didn't stop for existential crisis, so Elena pushed the fear down and focused on what needed doing. The older cattle needed to be sold before winter, which meant arranging transport and negotiating prices. The barn roof still leaked in 2 places. The fence line on the eastern pasture was falling apart, and Caleb had mentioned wanting to expand the herd next spring, which meant planning, budgeting, and 1,000 decisions neither of them could make alone. Partnership, Elena was discovering, meant a lot more talking than she'd anticipated. "We can't afford to expand and repair the barn," she said one evening, spreading the account ledgers across the kitchen table. "Not if we want to keep reserve funds for emergencies." Caleb frowned at the numbers. The herd expansion would pay for itself within 2 years. If nothing goes wrong, if we don't lose cattle to disease or drought or a harsh winter, if prices stay stable. That's a lot of ifs. Exactly. Which is why we need the reserve. Elena tapped the column of figures. "Fix the barn this year. Expand next year when we're more stable." Caleb leaned back, arms crossed. He had a habit of doing that when he didn't like what he was hearing but knew she was right. "Sarah always said I was too impulsive, wanted to do everything at once." "Was she right?" "Usually." He rubbed his face. "Fine. Barn first. But I want to at least get estimates on cattle prices. See what we'd be looking at for next year." "That's reasonable." They worked through the rest of the budget in careful detail, what they absolutely needed, what they could delay. where they might find savings. It was tedious work, but Elena found satisfaction in it. Every decision made together, every compromise reached, felt like building something that would last. Around 9, Caleb pushed back from the table with a groan. I need a break, my eyes are crossing. We're almost done. We've been at this for 3 hours. It can wait until tomorrow. He was right, though Elena was reluctant to admit it. She'd gotten into a habit of working until exhaustion forced her to stop, as if stopping meant the whole fragile structure they'd built might collapse. Caleb poured himself coffee, refilled her cup without asking. You need to learn to pace yourself. This ranch isn't going anywhere. I know. Do you? Because you work like someone who thinks it might disappear if you look away for 5 minutes. Elena stared into her coffee. Old habit. From what? She hadn't talked about Thomas since that first day. Hadn't mentioned the crossroads or the 2,000 miles of bad decisions that led there. But something about the quiet kitchen and Caleb's patient silence made the words come easier. The man who left me at that crossroads, she said slowly. Thomas, we were engaged. I followed him from Pennsylvania because he promised we'd build a life together in California. But somewhere along the way, he decided I was inconvenient. Dead weight. Someone slowing him down from whatever grand future he'd invented for himself. Caleb listened without interrupting. He never said it directly. Just kept finding reasons to delay, to postpone, to suggest maybe I should wait somewhere while he got established. By the time we reached that crossroads, I knew he wasn't coming back. But I waited anyway, because the alternative was admitting I'd wasted 2 years on a man who'd never seen me as anything but temporary. He was a fool, Caleb said quietly. Maybe. Or maybe he just knew what he wanted, and I wasn't it. Elena wrapped her hands around her cup. Either way, it taught me something. Waiting doesn't work. Hoping someone else will fix your life doesn't work. The only thing that works is doing it yourself. Is that why you work so hard? To prove you're not temporary? The question hit closer than she wanted to admit. Maybe. You own half this ranch, Elena. Legally documented, officially recorded. You're not going anywhere unless you choose to. I know that in my head, but the rest of me is still waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Sarah died in the bedroom upstairs. Fever took her over 3 days. I sat with her the whole time, watching her slip away, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing anyone could do. When she finally went, I thought I'd die too. Thought I couldn't possibly keep going without her. Elena didn't move, didn't speak. But I didn't die. I woke up the next morning and the cattle still needed feeding. The ranch still needed work. The world kept turning whether I wanted it to or not. So I kept going, mostly out of spite. If life wouldn't let me quit, then I'd do the bare minimum to survive and call it enough. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced like it had gone bitter. That worked for a while. Then you showed up, fixing Dutch's wagon like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I realized I'd been doing the bare minimum for so long I'd forgotten what actually trying looked like. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You saw what needed doing and you did it. No hesitation, no waiting for permission. You just acted. He met her eyes across the table. That's not temporary, Elena. That's someone who knows their worth. The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Elena wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that she'd finally found solid ground. I'm scared, she admitted, of messing this up, of proving everyone who doubted me right. Then we'll mess it up together, Caleb said. That's what partnership means. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. When Elena finally went upstairs, she pulled the partnership papers from her trunk and read them one more time. Her name, permanent and undeniable. Proof that she'd chosen something and made it real. She fell asleep holding the papers against her chest. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Elena was in the barn working on harness repairs when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders, moving with the casual confidence of people who belonged wherever they went. Caleb emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a rag. Elena walked over to stand beside him, curious. The lead rider was a man in his 50s, well-dressed but worn, with the kind of face that had spent decades squinting into sun and wind. The 2 men flanking him were younger, harder, with guns worn visible on their hips. Caleb Rourke? The older man called. That's right. Name's William Hayward. I own the Triple H Ranch, about 30 miles east. He dismounted, offered his hand. Caleb shook it warily. What can I do for you, mister? Hayward? Actually, I'm here about a business proposition. Hayward's eyes flicked to Elena. This your wife? Business partner, Elena Mercer. Hayward's eyebrows rose slightly, but he recovered quickly. Pleased to meet you, Miss Mercer. I've heard interesting things about this ranch. What kind of things? Elena asked. That it's well managed, profitable, running efficiently for the first time in years. Hayward smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm always interested in well-run operations. Caleb's expression went carefully neutral. We're not selling. I haven't made an offer yet. Don't need to. Answer's the same. Hayward laughed, though there was no humor in it. Hear me out at least. I'm consolidating holdings in this region, buying up smaller ranches, combining them into a more efficient operation. I can offer you a fair price. More than fair, considering current market conditions. We're not interested, Elena said. Hayward looked at her like he'd just noticed a dog had spoken. This is a business discussion, Miss Mercer. Perhaps the men should... She's my partner, Caleb cut in, voice hard. Equal say, and she said no. I see. Hayward's smile tightened. Well, perhaps you'd like to hear the actual numbers before making a decision? We wouldn't. Hayward studied them both, calculation clear in his eyes. You know, most small ranchers struggle out here. One bad season, one drought, one outbreak of disease, and everything falls apart. It's risky, trying to make it on your own. We're aware of the risks, Caleb said. Are you? Because I've seen a lot of operations like this fold. Owners think they can manage, then reality hits, and suddenly they're desperate to sell for whatever they can get. He paused. I'd hate to see that happen to you. The threat wasn't even subtle. Elena felt her spine stiffen. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Hayward, but we're not interested in selling, now or later. Never say never, Miss Mercer. Circumstances change. Hayward remounted his horse. I'll leave my offer open for 2 weeks. After that, the price goes down significantly. Think it over. He rode off with his men, leaving Caleb and Elena standing in the yard. That was pleasant, Elena said once they were out of earshot. Hayward's a land grabber. Buys up struggling ranches for nothing, works them hard for a few years, then sells to developers at 10 times what he paid. And we're a target because? Because we're small, relatively isolated, and he probably thinks we're vulnerable. Caleb watched the riders disappear over the ridge. He's wrong about the last part. What if he's not wrong about circumstances changing? What if we do hit a bad season? Then we handle it, together. Caleb turned to face her. That's what the reserve fund is for. That's why we're fixing the barn instead of expanding. We're planning for problems, not pretending they won't happen. Elena nodded, trying to shake off the unease Hayward's visit had left behind. But something about the man's confidence bothered her, like he knew something they didn't. Over the next week, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Hayward's implied threat. She found herself watching the eastern horizon, half expecting to see riders returning. Started noticing things she might have overlooked before. Fence posts that could be easily cut, water sources that could be poisoned, vulnerabilities in their operation that someone with bad intentions could exploit. You're doing it again, Caleb said one evening, catching her staring out the window. Doing what? Working yourself into a state over something that might never happen. Hayward seemed pretty confident we'd change our minds. Hayward's a bully. Bullies always act confident. Doesn't mean they have actual power. What if he tries something, sabotage, or then we deal with it? But we're not going to live in fear of what some land grabber might do. Caleb set down his coffee. Elena, listen. This ranch survived Sarah's death, my drinking, 2 years of neglect and mismanagement. It's stronger than it looks. We're stronger than we look. He was right, but that didn't stop the anxiety gnawing at her. She'd finally built something stable, something real, and the thought of losing it made her want to work harder, sleep less, watch more carefully. The problem was, she was already working as hard as she could. 3 days after Hayward's visit, Elena was in town picking up supplies when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. She was in the back of the general store, sorting through fabric options, when 2 ranchers she didn't know started talking near the front counter. Hayward's offering premium prices right now, one said. My neighbor sold last week. Got enough to retire comfortable. Smart man. Market's unstable. Better to get out while you can. That's what Hayward's saying, says there's trouble coming, drought predictions, railroad route changes that'll affect shipping. Better to sell now than wait until everyone's desperate. Elena stayed frozen behind the fabric display, listening. What about the Rourke place? The second man asked. Heard Hayward approached them. Heard they turned him down, which is stupid if you ask me. That ranch has been barely hanging on for years. Didn't Rourke take on a partner? Some woman from back east? Yeah, word is she's running the whole operation now. Got him to sign over half the property. The first man laughed. Bet Hayward loves that. Nothing like a woman playing rancher to make an operation look weak. Elena's hands clenched on the fabric. She wanted to march out there and correct every wrong assumption they'd just made. But that would only confirm she'd been eavesdropping, and it wouldn't change their minds anyway. Instead, she paid for her items and left without saying a word. That night, she told Caleb what she'd heard. He swore quietly. Hayward's spreading rumors, trying to make us look unstable so other ranchers won't want to do business with us. Is it working? Probably. People believe what they want to believe, and a lot of them want to believe women can't run ranches. Then we prove them wrong. We're already proving them wrong, but some people won't see it no matter how much evidence we give them. Caleb poured himself whiskey, offered her the bottle. She took it. The cattle sale, Elena said. If we get good prices, if we show we're profitable and stable, that'll help. It will. But Hayward's playing a longer game. He's not just trying to buy us out. He's trying to isolate us. Make other ranchers think we're weak so they won't partner with us, won't help if we need it. Can he actually do that? If people believe his lies, yeah, he can. Caleb took a long drink. But here's the thing about lies. They only work if the truth doesn't get out there louder. Elena thought about that. About truth and proof, and the exhausting work of defending yourself against people determined to believe the worst. So we make noise, she said. We show everyone exactly how well this ranch is doing. How? The community gathering next month, the harvest celebration. We go, we're visible. We make it impossible for people to ignore that we're succeeding. Caleb looked skeptical. I hate those things. I know, but hiding makes us look weak. If Hayward's spreading rumors that we're failing, we show up looking strong. And if Victoria makes it miserable, then we handle Victoria the same way we handled her last time, by being undeniable. They decided to go. But Elena spent the next 3 weeks preparing like she was going to war. She made a new dress from Mrs. Patterson's fabric, simple but well made, the kind of thing that said competence rather than desperation. She organized their financial records into a clear, impressive summary. She even convinced Caleb to get his hair cut and buy a new shirt. You're taking this very seriously, Caleb observed, watching her hem her dress with meticulous care. Because it matters. People judge on appearance. If we show up looking defeated, they'll believe Hayward's lies. If we show up looking successful, they'll have to reconsider. You sound like Sarah. She was always saying perception was half of business. She was right. The night before the gathering, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running through scenarios, what she'd say if someone asked about the partnership, how she'd respond to sideways comments about propriety, what she'd do if Hayward himself showed up. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Found Caleb already there, sitting in the dark. Can't sleep either? She asked. Keep thinking about Sarah. She loved these gatherings. Would spend days preparing food, planning what to wear, getting excited about seeing people. His voice was rough. Last one we went to together was 3 years ago. She was already getting sick, but she insisted on going. Spent the whole time talking to everyone, laughing, being herself. 2 months later, she was dead. Elena sat down across from him. Is that why you stopped going? Partly. Also couldn't stand the pity. Everyone looking at me like I was broken, wondering if I'd fall apart right there in front of them. And now I'm wondering if I can actually do this without making a fool of myself. You won't. You don't know that. I do, because you're not alone this time. Elena reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. We're partners, remember? We do this together. Caleb looked down at their hands, then back up at her face. When did you get so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just tired of letting other people define what I can be. They sat there in the dark, hands touching, Two people trying to convince themselves they were strong enough to face whatever came next. The harvest gathering was held at the largest ranch in the region, a sprawling operation owned by a family named Morrison. By the time Caleb and Elena arrived, dozens of wagons already filled the yard, and the sound of music drifted from the main barn. Elena smoothed her new dress, took a breath, and climbed down. Caleb came around to stand beside her, offering his arm. They walked in together. The barn had been transformed, tables laden with food, lanterns strung overhead, musicians playing in one corner. People filled the space, talking and laughing. The whole community gathered in celebration of another season survived. Conversations didn't exactly stop when they entered, but they definitely quieted. Elena felt eyes on them, assessing, judging, forming opinions. Then Mrs. Patterson appeared, smiling warm and genuine. "Elena, Caleb, I'm so glad you came. That dress looks wonderful on you." "Thank you for the fabric." "My pleasure. Come, let me introduce you to some people." Mrs. Patterson was strategic in her introductions, starting with friendlier faces, building momentum before approaching the more skeptical. She introduced them to ranchers who'd heard about their financial turnaround, women who admired Elena's bookkeeping skills, younger couples just starting out who wanted advice. By the time they'd made it halfway around the barn, Elena started to relax. Not everyone was hostile. Some were genuinely interested, impressed even. Then she saw Hayward. He stood near the back with a group of established ranchers, looking comfortable and confident. His eyes met Elena's across the barn, and he smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Ignore him," Caleb murmured. "Hard to do." "Try anyway." They ate dinner at one of the long tables, surrounded by neighbors who asked careful questions about the ranch. Elena answered honestly. They'd had a good year, the cattle were healthy, they were planning modest expansion. Caleb added details about repairs and improvements, making it clear they were investing in the long term. After dinner came dancing. Elena hadn't danced in years, but Caleb surprised her by being competent at it. "Sarah taught me," he explained, leading her through a simple waltz. "Said I had 2 left feet, but she'd make do." She was generous. She was patient. There's a difference. They danced 2 songs before Hayward approached. He waited until the music stopped, then stepped smoothly between them. "Miss Mercer," he said, "mind if I have this dance?" It wasn't really a question. Refusing would cause a scene. Elena glanced at Caleb, who gave a tiny nod. "Of course," she said, taking Hayward's offered hand. He led her onto the floor as the next song started, something slower, more intimate. Elena kept her expression neutral and her spine straight. "You're making quite an impression," Hayward said. "Am I?" "People are talking about the Rourke Ranch, how well it's doing under new management." His smile was sharp. "Your management, specifically." "Caleb and I manage it together." "Of course. Equal partners. Very modern." He spun her smoothly. "Though I have to wonder, what happens when the partnership stops being convenient? When one of you wants to sell and the other doesn't? That won't happen. It always happens eventually. People's interests diverge. Someone meets someone else, wants to move on, wants their capital freed up. The partnership agreement has provisions for that, doesn't it?" Elena's stomach went cold. He'd read their partnership papers. Of course he had. They were public record. 6 months' notice, Hayward continued. Either party can buy out the other, which means in 6 months, if you decide you've had enough of ranch life, you could force a sale. Split the assets, take your half, leave Caleb scrambling. I wouldn't do that. Maybe not, but the option exists, and that makes the ranch vulnerable, unstable. He leaned closer. Which affects its value. Something potential buyers would definitely consider. The song ended. Elena stepped back, putting distance between them. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Hayward, but I should get back to my partner." "Of course. Just think about what I said. Circumstances change, Miss Mercer. They always do." She found Caleb near the food tables, talking to Patterson about market prices. He took one look at her face and excused himself. "What did he say?" Elena told him. Watched his expression go dark. "He's trying to get in your head, make you doubt." "I know, but he's not wrong, is he? The partnership does have that clause. Either of us could force a buyout." "Either of us could, but neither of us will." "How do you know?" Caleb faced her fully. "Because I know you. I've watched you work for 3 months. I've seen how you care about this place, how you plan for its future. You're not building something just to abandon it. People change their minds. Some do, you won't. His certainty was absolute. And even if you did, even if circumstances changed and you needed to leave, we'd work it out, like partners. Elena wanted to believe him, but Hayward had planted seeds of doubt that were already taking root. They left the gathering early, both tired and unsettled. The ride home was quiet, each lost in separate thoughts. Back at the ranch, Elena went straight to the partnership papers and reread the buyout clause. It was fair, reasonable, exactly the kind of protection two business partners should have. But Hayward was right. It also meant uncertainty, meant that everything they were building together could dissolve with 6 months' notice. She heard Caleb come upstairs, pause outside her door. Elena? Yeah? Don't let him win. Don't let him make you doubt what we're doing here. I'm not doubting. You are. I can hear it in your voice. A pause. We're going to be fine. The ranch is solid. Our partnership is solid. Hayward's just noise. What if he's not? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Then we'll deal with it, together, like we deal with everything else. He went to his room. Elena sat with the papers in her lap, trying to quiet the fear that said nothing good ever lasted. That she'd finally found solid ground only to discover it was still temporary, still conditional, still dependent on circumstances she couldn't control. Outside, the prairie was dark and silent. Inside, the house creaked and settled, familiar sounds that had become home. Elena folded the papers, put them back in her trunk, and made herself a promise. She wouldn't let fear win, wouldn't let Hayward or Victoria or anyone else convince her she didn't belong here. She'd fought too hard to get here. She wasn't giving up now. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that fighting and winning weren't the same thing. And sometimes, no matter how hard you fought, circumstances changed anyway. The doubt Hayward planted festered for 2 days before Elena decided to do something about it. She couldn't change the partnership agreement. Didn't want to, really, since its fairness was part of what made it work. But she could prove his predictions wrong. She found Caleb in the barn, repairing a saddle that should have been replaced years ago, but that he insisted still had life in it. His hands worked the leather with practiced efficiency, the kind of muscle memory that came from years of doing the same task over and over. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up, read something in her expression that made him set down his tools immediately. "All right. Hayward's right about one thing. The partnership makes us vulnerable to outside perception. People see the buyout clause and assume instability. Let them assume. We can't afford to. Not if Hayward's actively working against us." Elena crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she'd developed whenever she was about to propose something risky. "We need to show everyone that we're committed long-term, both of us." "How do you suggest we do that?" "Investments, big ones. The kind you don't make if you're planning to bail in 6 months." She pulled out the notes she'd been working on all morning, pages covered in her careful handwriting and calculations. The barn roof, the fence expansion, new breeding stock, projects that'll take years to pay off. Caleb took the list, scanned it with those careful eyes that missed nothing. "This is ambitious. It's necessary. We do this. Word gets around that we're expanding, not retreating. Hayward's rumors about us being weak fall apart. It's also expensive, wipes out most of our reserve fund." "I know, but what's the alternative? Sit here being conservative while Hayward convinces everyone we're about to collapse?" Elena met his eyes directly, refusing to let him see the fear underneath her determination. "We can't win by playing it safe, not against someone like him." Caleb studied the list for a long time. She could see him doing the calculations in his head, weighing risks against rewards, trying to find the holes in her logic. Finally, he said, "You're right, but if we do this, we commit completely. No second guessing, no backing out halfway." "I'm not backing out." "I know, just needed to hear you say it." He set the list down and extended his hand across the workbench. "Partners?" "Partners." They shook hands, formal and ridiculous, and somehow exactly right. Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not quite relief, but a sense of forward momentum that pushed back against the doubt. The next week, they started spending money like they meant it. Caleb hired 2 ranch hands to help with the fence work, Good men who'd been looking for steady employment since the last ranch they worked for went under. Ben was older, maybe 50, with a face like weathered leather and hands that knew their business. The younger one, Marcus, was barely 20 but eager to learn and willing to work hard. Elena ordered lumber for the barn roof and supplies for expanding the livestock pens. She spent hours with the sawmill manager, negotiating prices and delivery schedules, pushing for every advantage she could get. The man initially tried to inflate the prices, probably assuming a woman wouldn't know better. She'd corrected him by rattling off the going rates from 3 different suppliers and watching his expression shift from condescension to grudging respect. They contracted with a breeder 2 territories over for prime cattle that wouldn't arrive until spring, but that required a substantial deposit now. The breeder, a gruff man named Thornton, had been skeptical about dealing with a woman partner until Elena walked his stock with him, asking informed questions about lineage and health markers that proved she knew what she was talking about. "Your partner taught you well," Thornton had said. "My father taught me," Elena corrected. "Caleb just gave me the chance to use what I already knew." Every decision was documented, every expense recorded in the ledgers with Elena's meticulous attention to detail. She made sure of that. When people asked, and they did ask because news traveled fast in the territory, she had numbers ready. Profit margins, projected growth, return on investment timelines. She could cite figures without consulting her notes, had committed the entire operation to memory. Dutch was impressed when he heard about their plans. "You two are actually doing this right. Most people either overextend trying to grow too fast, or they're too conservative and never build anything. You're finding the middle ground." "We're trying," Elena said, though privately she wondered if they were threading a needle in a windstorm. "More than trying. Word's getting around that the Rourke Ranch is making moves, smart moves." He lowered his voice and glanced around to make sure no one was in earshot. "Also hearing that Hayward's not happy about it." "Good. Be careful, though. Man like that doesn't like being proven wrong. He's got resources and connections we don't. If he decides to really come after you, then we'll handle it when it happens." Dutch shook his head but didn't push further. Elena knew he meant well, but she was tired of being warned about what might happen. She'd spent enough of her life being cautious, and it had gotten her exactly nowhere. The fence work turned out to be harder than anyone anticipated. The ground was rocky in places, clay-heavy in others, and seemed determined to resist every post they tried to set. Ben and Marcus worked alongside Elena and Caleb, all 4 of them sweating in the late autumn sun. On the 3rd day, Marcus set a post wrong. Didn't dig deep enough, didn't pack the soil properly. The post wobbled when Elena tested it. "This won't hold," she said. "You need to pull it and start over." Marcus's face flushed. "I thought it was deep enough." "Thinking isn't the same as knowing. Dig another 6 inches. Pack it tighter." "That's a lot of extra work for one post." "It's the difference between a fence that lasts 10 years and one that fails in the first storm." Elena grabbed a shovel and started digging herself. "I'll show you how it's done. Watch." She worked for 20 minutes, demonstrating the proper technique, the angle of the hole, the way to pack dirt in layers, how to test for stability. Marcus watched with the careful attention of someone who'd been embarrassed, but was smart enough to learn from it. When she finished, the post stood solid and true. She handed Marcus the shovel. "Your turn. Do the next 3 exactly like that." He did, and they were perfect. Ben pulled her aside later. Not many bosses would take the time to teach instead of just yelling. Yelling doesn't fix bad work. Teaching does. Still, it's appreciated. The barn roof was worse than the fence. Halfway through tearing off the old shingles, they discovered the support beams underneath had significant rot damage. What should have been a simple re-roofing job turned into major structural repair. "This is going to cost twice what we budgeted," Caleb said, staring up at the exposed beams with an expression somewhere between resignation and anger. "I know. We might have to delay the breeding stock purchase." Elena did the math in her head, running through the numbers she'd memorized. They could delay, but it would set them back a full year on the expansion timeline. What if we do the minimum structural work now and finish it properly next year? That's risky. Another bad storm could take the whole barn down. So could waiting and losing our deposit on the cattle. They stood there in the partially demolished barn, arguing costs and risks while rain started falling through the half-finished roof. Both of them getting soaked, neither willing to back down, water dripping from their hair and running down their faces. Finally, Caleb laughed, sharp and frustrated, but somehow genuine. We're a mess. We're making it work. Are we? Because from where I'm standing, we're standing in a broken barn, arguing about money we don't have while getting rained on. That's called problem solving. That's called being stubborn. Same thing sometimes. Elena wiped rain from her face, tasted it on her lips. We fixed the barn properly. I'll find the money somewhere. Where? We've already allocated every dollar we have. I don't know yet, but I will. She meant it too. She'd figure something out because the alternative, admitting defeat, scaling back, proving Hayward right, was unacceptable. That night, she spread the account ledgers across the kitchen table and went through every line item again, looking for anything they could trim, any expense they could reduce, any source of income she'd overlooked. Her eyes burned from the lamplight and the hours of focus, but she kept working. She found savings in small places. Switching suppliers for feed saved them $15 a month. Negotiating better terms with the blacksmith saved another $10. Selling off equipment they didn't use brought in $40 cash. It wasn't enough to cover the full cost of the barn repairs, but it helped close the gap. Around midnight, Caleb came downstairs and found her still working, papers spread everywhere, numbers swimming in her vision. You need to sleep, he said. I need to solve this. It'll still be here in the morning. So will the problem. At least this way I'm doing something about it. She rubbed her eyes, felt the grit of exhaustion. There has to be something I'm missing. Some way to make the numbers work. Caleb sat down across from her, looked at the ledgers with tired eyes. What if we borrowed? From who? The bank won't loan to us. We're too new, too risky. Not the bank. Patterson owes me a favor from 2 years back. I helped him through a rough winter, gave him feed on credit when no one else would. He might be willing to return the favor. Elena considered it. Taking on debt was risky, but it would solve their immediate problem. How much do you think he'd lend? Enough to finish the barn properly. Maybe not enough for the full expansion, but enough to not lose everything if the barn collapses. That's a lot of trust to ask from a neighbor. We've earned some trust by now, haven't we? They talked it through, weighing the risks and benefits until Elena's head ached from thinking. Finally, she nodded. Talk to Patterson, see what he says. But we pay him back fast. I don't want to be in debt longer than we have to be. Agreed. The solution came from an unexpected source before Caleb could approach Patterson. Miss Chen appeared at the ranch 3 days later, driving her own wagon with the kind of determined expression that meant she'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. I heard you're doing barn repairs, she said without preamble. Word travels fast, Elena replied, wiping her hands on her work apron. It does when you're making noise loud enough for the whole territory to hear. Miss Chen climbed down from the wagon, looked at the partially demolished roof with a critical eye. I have a proposition. My store needs a new bookkeeping system. Current one's a disaster, worse than yours was when you started, if you can believe it. I'll pay you to set it up properly. Elena blinked, surprised. You want to hire me? I want to hire your expertise. From what I hear, you turned the work accounts from chaos into something actually functional. I need that for my business. I'm not a professional bookkeeper. Neither was I when I started running the store. We learn by doing. Miss Chen named a price that would cover the remaining barn costs with money left over. Interested? Elena looked at Caleb, who had emerged from the barn to see what was happening. He shrugged, leaving the decision to her. I'll do it, Elena said. When do you want to start? Tomorrow, if you can manage it. I've been putting this off for too long and it's getting worse every week. They worked out an arrangement. Elena would spend 2 days a week in town working on Miss Chen's accounts. It meant longer hours and more time away from the ranch, but the money was too good to refuse. Besides, it would give her more visibility in town, more connections, more proof that she was here to stay. That first day at the dry goods store, Elena discovered Miss Chen hadn't exaggerated about the state of her records. The bookkeeping was catastrophic. Receipts mixed with invoices, expenses recorded 3 different ways depending on who had written them down, income that appeared and disappeared depending on which ledger you checked. How have you stayed in business? Elena asked, staring at the chaos spread across the backroom table. Stubbornness and luck? Mostly stubbornness. Miss Chen poured them tea from a pot she kept warm on a small stove. My father kept everything in his head. He had a mind for numbers, could track every transaction without writing anything down. When he died, I inherited a profitable store and absolutely no idea how the finances actually worked. You've been guessing for how long? 4 years. And you're still profitable. Barely, which is why I need help. Miss Chen sat down, looked at Elena directly. Also, between us, I wanted to offer you work because Victoria's been telling everyone you're going to abandon the ranch within 6 months. Figured the best way to prove her wrong was to show the community you're invested here long term. Elena hadn't expected such blunt honesty. She appreciated it. Thank you for that. Don't thank me. You're earning this money. I wouldn't hire you if I didn't think you could do the work. I'm practical, not charitable. They spent the next 6 hours building a new system from scratch. Simple enough for Miss Chen to maintain herself, detailed enough to catch problems before they became catastrophic. By the end of the day, they both had headaches, but also the beginnings of actual organization. This is going to take weeks, Elena said, looking at all the work still ahead. I know. Good thing I'm paying you well. Over the following month, Elena developed a routine that would have broken a less determined person. Mondays and Thursdays in town working on Miss Chen's accounts. The rest of the week at the ranch, managing their own operations and overseeing the various construction projects. Early mornings and late nights blurred together. She learned to function on 5 hours of sleep, to eat meals while reviewing ledgers, to switch between different sets of books without losing track of which numbers belonged where. It was exhausting. Some nights she fell asleep at the kitchen table, waking hours later with Caleb shaking her shoulder gently and telling her to go to bed properly. You need to rest, he'd say, concern evident in his voice. I need to finish this. It can wait until tomorrow. But tomorrow always brought more work, more decisions, more problems that needed solving. The fence project hit unexpected rock formations that required different tools and techniques. One of the hired hands quit without notice after his wife decided she couldn't handle ranch life anymore. A late-season storm damaged the freshly installed roofing before they could properly seal it, requiring expensive repairs. Through it all, Elena kept moving, kept working, kept proving that she wasn't temporary, wasn't going anywhere. Wasn't going to let Hayward or Victoria or anyone else define what she could build. Then, 6 weeks into their expansion projects, everything nearly fell apart. Elena was in town working with Miss Chen when Dutch found her, bursting into the back room with an expression that made her stomach drop before he said a word. You need to get back to the ranch. Now. What happened? Cattle broke through the east fence. Dozen head wandering onto Hayward's property. He's holding them, saying you owe him damages for the trespass. Elena's stomach turned to ice. How bad? Bad enough. He's talking about filing a formal claim with the territory, demanding compensation for his trouble and losses. Could tie you up in court for months, maybe longer. She was gathering her things before Dutch finished talking, shoving papers into her bag with shaking hands. Miss Chen appeared with Elena's coat, helping her into it. Go, Miss Chen said. We'll finish this later. Handle your emergency. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. Elena's mind raced through scenarios, costs, legal complications that could destroy everything they'd built. They'd been so careful with the fence work, had checked every post, every joint, had done everything right. How had this happened? Had Marcus made another mistake? Had the storm damaged more than they realized? Or was this something else entirely? She found Caleb at the eastern property line, facing off with Hayward and 2 of his men. A dozen of their cattle milled nervously in Hayward's holding pen, looking stressed and confused. The fence behind them showed a clear gap, wire cut and posts pulled deliberately out of alignment. Elena, Caleb said as she climbed down from the wagon, his voice tight with controlled anger. Hayward's claiming our fence failed and our cattle damaged his property. What damages? Elena demanded, walking straight up to Hayward without hesitation. Hayward gestured vaguely at the land around them. Trampled grazing land, stressed my herd with the intrusion, general disruption to my operation, not to mention the time and effort required to round up your animals and contain them properly. Show me the damages, specifically. I don't need to show you anything. The cattle were on my property illegally, that's all that matters. If you're claiming damages, you need to prove them. That's how it works. Hayward's smile was cold. Is it? Because I think what matters is what the territorial judge decides when I file my claim. and judges tend to side with established ranchers over newcomers who can't control their livestock. Elena ignored him and walked to the fence line, examining every inch with careful attention. Caleb followed, leaving Hayward standing with his men. The break point was near a section they'd repaired just 2 weeks ago, cleanly cut wire, posts pulled deliberately out of alignment in a way that no storm or animal could have caused. "This wasn't an accident," she said quietly, running her fingers over the wire ends. "I know," Caleb said, equally quiet. "Question is, can we prove it?" "You calling me a liar, Miss Mercer?" Hayward called from behind them. Elena turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral despite the rage building in her chest. "I'm saying this fence was cut, deliberately. The wire ends are too clean, the posts too carefully removed. This was sabotage." "That's a serious accusation. Can you prove it?" Elena examined the wire ends again. The cuts were precise, made with proper tools, nothing like the ragged tears that would come from stress or weather damage. But proving sabotage versus accidental failure in a court of law would be nearly impossible without witnesses or physical evidence beyond the fence itself. "How much are you demanding?" Caleb asked, voice tight with suppressed fury. $500. For the damages, the inconvenience, and my trouble in dealing with this situation. It was an outrageous sum, more than the cattle themselves were worth, more than reasonable compensation for any actual damages. Elena felt rage building in her chest, cold and sharp and clarifying. This wasn't about money. This was about breaking them, about forcing them into debt or court battles that would drain their resources and reputation. "We're not paying," she said. Hayward's smile widened. "Then I'll see you in territorial court. And while that process drags out for months, everyone in the territory will hear about how the Rourke Ranch can't even maintain its fences properly, how unstable your operation is, how partnering with an inexperienced woman led to costly mistakes and liability." There it was, the real play. Hayward didn't care about $500. He had plenty of money. He wanted the story, the ammunition to use against them, the narrative that would convince other ranchers to avoid doing business with them. Elena looked at Caleb, saw the same calculation happening behind his eyes, the same understanding of what Hayward was really after. "We'll pay," Caleb said heavily. "No," Elena cut in sharply. "We won't." "Elena, he's sabotaged our fence. We all know it. And if we pay him, we're admitting fault for something we didn't do. That'll cost us more in the long run than any court battle." Hayward's smile faded slightly, replaced by something harder. "You'd really rather go to court? Spend months in legal proceedings, rack up lawyer fees you can't afford, risk a judgment that could force you to sell?" "I'd rather fight than reward sabotage and extortion." "You can't prove sabotage." "Maybe not in court. But I can tell everyone in the territory what happened here today. How you showed up claiming damages the exact same day our fence mysteriously failed. How the cuts looked deliberate and professional. How you demanded immediate payment instead of working it out like neighbors should." Elena stepped closer, refusing to let him intimidate her. "You want to control the story? So do I. And I guarantee mine is more interesting than yours." Hayward's expression went dark, the friendly mask dropping completely. "You're making a mistake, Miss Mercer. A serious one." "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension stretched taut enough to snap. Then Hayward jerked his head at his men. "Get their cattle out of my pen. I don't want them on my property another minute." He rode off without another word, his men following after releasing the cattle. Elena watched them go, her hand shaking now that the confrontation was over. Caleb waited until they were alone, until the sound of Hayward's horses had faded completely, before saying, "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both." Elena's hands were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together. "Did I just make everything worse?" "No idea. But it felt damn good watching his face when you called his bluff." Caleb started gathering the scattered cattle. "Help me get these home. Then we need to repair that fence properly." They brought the cattle back, checking each one for injuries or stress. Then they spent the rest of the daylight hours repairing the fence with extra reinforcement. Thicker wire, deeper posts, work that would hold against anything short of deliberate destruction with heavy equipment. Ben and Marcus showed up as they were finishing, having heard about the incident from Dutch. "You need help?" Ben asked. We've got it handled, Caleb said. But thanks for coming. Heard what you said to Hayward, Marcus added, looking at Elena with something like awe. That took guts. That took anger. Guts would have been walking away. No, Ben said quietly. Walking away would have been smart, maybe. But what you did was right. There's a difference. That night, Elena couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, kept replaying the confrontation in her head, wondering if she'd just destroyed everything they'd built. The smarter play would have been to pay Hayward, swallow the injustice, move on. But she'd let her pride and anger make the decision instead of her head. Around midnight, Caleb knocked on her door. She opened it to find him holding 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. Can't sleep either? He asked. Keep thinking I should have just paid him, ended it quickly. Then he would have won, and he'd know he could do it again any time he wanted, could bleed us dry one false claim at a time. Caleb handed her a glass, poured for both of them. You did the right thing, the hard thing. There's usually overlap between those two. What if the whole territory believes his version of events? What if we lose customers, lose credibility? Some will believe him, but the ones worth knowing will see through it. He took a sip of whiskey, grimaced. Sarah used to say you can't control what people think about you. You can only control whether you're proud of what you do. Are you proud of what you did today? Elena thought about it. About standing up to Hayward, refusing to be bullied, choosing the hard fight over the easy surrender. About protecting what they'd built instead of letting someone take it piece by piece. Yeah, I am. Then that's enough. Has to be. They sat in the hallway outside her room, passing the bottle back and forth, talking through the possibilities and implications until the whiskey was gone and the sky started to lighten with dawn. The next few days were tense. Elena waited for news to spread, for backlash, for proof that she'd miscalculated badly. She prepared herself for hostile looks in town, for customers pulling their business, for the slow death of reputation that could kill a ranch as surely as drought or disease. Instead, something unexpected happened. Patterson stopped by 3 days later with supplies they hadn't ordered. Extra fence wire, heavy-duty tools, materials they'd need for reinforcing the whole property line. Heard about your fence trouble, Patterson said, unloading the wagon. Figured you could use extra materials just in case. We can't afford... It's not for sale, it's being neighborly. Patterson's expression was carefully neutral. Had some fence troubles of my own few years back. Never could prove anything, but I had my suspicions about who was behind it. Nice to see someone finally standing up instead of taking it. Mrs. Patterson came the following day with enough food to feed them for a week. Community looks out for each other, she said firmly, especially when someone's being bullied by folks who should know better. Even Miss Chen weighed in when Elena returned to work on her accounts. Hayward tried to buy my store last year, acted friendly and respectful until I said no, then suddenly I had all sorts of problems. Shipments delayed without explanation, suppliers refusing to work with me, rumors about my credit being bad. Took 6 months to prove he was behind most of it. What happened? Elena asked, looking up from the ledgers. I outlasted him. Eventually people got tired of his games and started doing business with me again. Plus, his tactics were obvious enough that folks started seeing through them. Miss Chen poured tea with steady hands. Point is, you're not the first person he's tried to squeeze out, but you might be the first one to stand up to him publicly and make it stick. People notice that kind of courage. Word spread about the confrontation, as Elena had known it would, but the story that circulated wasn't quite what Hayward had wanted. It wasn't about incompetent ranchers who couldn't control their livestock. It was about a woman rancher refusing to be intimidated by a land grabber, about partnership and principle, about standing your ground even when it cost you, maybe especially when it cost you. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Victoria made sure to spread doubt wherever she went, questioning Elena's judgment, suggesting the whole thing proved women weren't suited for ranch management and decision-making. But enough people believed Elena's version, or at least respected her willingness to fight, that Hayward's power started looking less absolute. His influence began to show cracks. 3 weeks later, at another community gathering, a harvest celebration that Elena attended with reluctance and Caleb attended with resignation, Hayward approached them again. This time he was alone, without his usual enforcers, and his expression was harder to read. Rourke, Miss Mercer. Hayward, Caleb said neutrally, I'm withdrawing my damage claim. Elena kept her expression carefully blank despite the surge of relief and triumph. Why? Let's just say it's not worth the trouble or the attention. He paused, studying her with those calculating eyes. I underestimated you, Miss Mercer. Won't make that mistake again. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an admission of wrongdoing, but it was acknowledgement that she'd won this round, that her gamble had paid off. Elena took it as the closest thing to victory she was likely to get from a man like Hayward. After he left, melting back into the crowd, Caleb said quietly, He'll try something else eventually. Men like that don't forgive being beaten. Probably. But we'll handle it when it comes. Elena watched Hayward disappear among the other ranchers. That's what partners do. We handle things together. The winter that followed was hard but productive in ways that mattered. They finished the barn repairs properly, with structural reinforcement that would last decades. The fence expansion was completed with materials that could withstand anything short of deliberate destruction with heavy equipment. They took delivery of the breeding stock they'd ordered, fine cattle that arrived healthy and strong, exactly what they needed to build the herd for the long term. Elena continued working with Miss Chen 2 days a week, earning money and building connections throughout the territory. She'd become a fixture at the dry goods store, someone people sought out for advice on bookkeeping and business management. Word spread that she had a talent for making sense of chaos, for finding order in impossible messes. She started getting requests from other businesses. A small hotel needed help organizing their accounts. A rancher 3 properties over wanted advice on financial planning. Even the territorial land office asked if she'd consult on their record-keeping system. Each job brought in money and credibility. Each success proved she belonged here, that she'd earned her place through competence rather than charity or manipulation. Victoria still spread poison when she could, still whispered about impropriety and questioned Elena's morals. But her influence was waning steadily. Too many people had their own positive experiences with Elena to believe the worst anymore. Too many had seen her work, her results, her unwavering commitment to building something that lasted. One evening in late winter, with snow falling soft and steady outside, Elena and Caleb sat at the kitchen table going over year-end accounts. The numbers were good, better than good. They turned a real profit despite all the expansion costs, despite Hayward's interference, despite every obstacle and setback. We did it, Elena said, staring at the final total she'd calculated 3 times to make sure it was real. We did, Caleb agreed. I mean, we really did it. The ranch is stable, growing. We're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving. Caleb leaned back in his chair, a rare smile crossing his face. Sarah would be proud of the ranch, of what we've built here, of how we built it. You think so? I know so. She always said a good ranch was about more than land and cattle and profit margins. It was about people willing to work for something bigger than themselves, something that would outlast them. He looked at Elena across the table, his expression open in a way it rarely was. You gave me that again. Purpose, partnership, a reason to care about more than just getting through another day. Elena didn't know what to say. The words felt too big, too important to acknowledge casually, so she said the first thing that came to mind. I'm glad I fixed Dutch's wagon that day. Caleb laughed, genuine and warm and surprised. Best broken axle I ever heard of. They worked in comfortable silence after that, 2 people who'd learned to build something together, who'd figured out how to turn broken pieces into something solid and lasting. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing the promise of new growth. The breeding stock produced healthy calves, strong animals with good bloodlines that would strengthen the herd for years to come. The expanded pastures meant they could increase the herd size without overgrazing or depleting the land. Miss Chen offered Elena a permanent consulting position, helping other businesses in the territory organize their finances and operations. The pay was good, the work was interesting, and it gave Elena a level of independence she'd never had before. You've got a real talent for this, Miss Chen said one afternoon, reviewing the work Elena had done for the hotel. People trust you. They see you making the Rourke Ranch work, turning chaos into order, and they want that for themselves. I'm not a miracle worker. No, you're just someone who shows people what's possible when you stop making excuses and start doing the actual work. That's rarer than you think. Elena took the consulting position officially, which meant more time in town, more visibility, more proof that she'd become a permanent part of this community. One afternoon in early spring, she was walking back from Miss Chen's store when she saw a familiar wagon at the edge of town. Her breath caught in her throat, recognition hitting like a physical blow. Thomas. He was older than she remembered, thinner, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, a deep weariness that came from years of disappointment and unfulfilled promises. He was talking to someone outside the saloon, gesturing in that animated way he had when he was trying to convince someone of something, sell them on whatever dream or scheme had captured his imagination this week. Elena could walk away. He hadn't seen her yet, was too focused on his conversation. She could disappear down a side street before he noticed, avoid the confrontation entirely, pretend this moment wasn't happening. Instead, she walked straight toward him with her head up and her spine straight. He saw her coming, went completely still. Recognition dawned slowly across his face, followed by confusion, then something that might have been shame or regret or both. "Elena," he said, his voice uncertain. "Thomas." An awkward pause stretched between them. The person he'd been talking to, a young man Elena didn't recognize, made a quick excuse and disappeared into the saloon, clearly sensing the tension. "You're still here," Thomas said, like he couldn't quite believe it. I figured you'd have gone back east by now. Back to Pennsylvania, back home." "Why would I do that?" Because of what I did, leaving you at that crossroads." He couldn't quite meet her eyes, his gaze sliding away. "I've regretted it every day since, wondering if you were all right, hoping somehow you'd forgive me." "Have you?" "I made it to California, found work, tried to build something out there. But it never felt right. Nothing ever felt right. I kept thinking about you, about what I'd done, hoping maybe I could find you and make it right somehow." Elena studied him with detached curiosity. This man she'd followed 2,000 miles across the country, who'd promised her a future and then discarded her when she became inconvenient. She'd spent so many nights angry at him, hurt by him, trying to understand how someone could be so casually cruel to another person. Looking at him now, standing there with his worn clothes and his guilty expression, she felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no longing for what might have been. Just a distant curiosity about who she'd been when she thought she loved him. "I did better than okay," she said calmly. "I own a ranch now. A partnership. We're profitable, expanding, building something that'll last for generations." Thomas blinked rapidly, clearly trying to process this information. "You own? How did you manage that?" "I worked for it, earned it, proved I was worth investing in." She kept her voice even, factual. "Turns out I'm good at fixing things. Buildings, finances, operations. All the skills my father taught me that you said weren't proper for a woman." That's good. I'm happy for you, truly." He didn't look happy. He looked confused. Maybe a little resentful that she'd succeeded without him, maybe even because of his abandonment rather than despite it. "I should go," Elena said. "I have work to finish before dark." "Elena, wait, please." He took a step closer. "I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance you could forgive me? That we could start over, try again?" She almost laughed at the absurdity. "Start over as what?" "I don't know. Friends? Maybe more, if you're willing to give me another chance. I've changed. I'm not the same man who left you at that crossroads." "I gave you chances, Thomas. 2,000 miles worth of chances. You used every single one of them to prove you weren't worth the faith I put in you. I was young, stupid, scared of responsibility, but I've grown up. I understand what I lost. Maybe you have changed, but I've changed too. I'm not the woman who waited at that crossroads anymore, hoping someone would come back and fix her life." Elena looked at him directly, making sure he understood. "I'm not waiting for anyone. Not anymore." She walked away without looking back, without hesitation. She heard him call her name once, but she kept walking with steady steps toward the wagon that would take her home. When she got back to the ranch, Caleb was in the barn working on tack, the familiar smell of leather and oil filling the space. He looked up when she entered, reading something in her expression. You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Thomas is in town. Caleb's hands went still on the leather. The man who left you at the crossroads. He wants forgiveness. Maybe another chance at something. What did you tell him? That I'm not waiting anymore. That I've built a life that doesn't include him. Elena sat down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. It was strange. I spent so long being angry at him, so much time trying to understand why he did what he did. And seeing him today, I just felt nothing. Like he was a stranger I used to know in another lifetime. That's called moving on. Actually moving on, not just saying you have. I guess it is. She looked at Caleb, this man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd trusted her with his ranch and his future. I never properly thanked you for taking a chance on someone you found at the side of the road fixing a wagon. I didn't take a chance. You took a chance on yourself by fixing that wagon, by asking for work, by proving you belonged here. Caleb set down his tools. I just gave you the space to do what you were already capable of doing. Still, thank you for the partnership, for the trust, for treating me like an equal when most people wouldn't have. You earned equal treatment by being equal. That's how it works when people are honest about what they bring to the table. They worked together the rest of the afternoon in comfortable companionship. Two people who'd built something real from nothing, who'd survived challenges and doubt and active opposition. That evening, Elena stood on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The house behind her was solid and well-maintained, every board and beam a testament to work done right. The land around her was productive and carefully managed, the cattle healthy, the fences strong. The future ahead was uncertain in the way all futures are, but it was hers to shape, hers to build, hers to defend. She thought about the crossroads where this all started, about sitting on that trunk, abandoned and lost, trying to decide what came next, about the choice she had made to stop waiting and start doing. She'd made the right choice. Not following Thomas, not chasing what had left her behind, but standing up, fixing what was broken, building something new from broken pieces. The door opened behind her. Caleb stepped out, handed her coffee without a word. They stood there together as the light faded, two partners watching over land they'd fought to keep, to grow, to make their own. You ever think about what might have happened if Dutch's wagon hadn't broken down that day? Caleb asked after a long silence. Sometimes. But it did break down, and I fixed it, and that choice led here. No point wondering about other paths when this one turned out right. You think it turned out right? Elena looked at the ranch, at everything they'd built together, everything they'd survived, everything still ahead of them. The barn with its new roof, solid and weatherproof. The expanded pastures filled with healthy cattle. The books that balanced, the accounts that made sense, the future that looked possible instead of impossible. Yeah, I do. Caleb nodded, satisfied with that answer. Good, because I was worried you'd eventually want that buyout clause. Want to cash out and move on to something else, somewhere else. Not interested in moving on. This is home now. Good, he said again, softer this time, like the word meant more than just agreement. They finished their coffee as full darkness settled over the prairie, the sky filling with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside, the house waited warm and lit, familiar and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more decisions to make together. But tonight, standing on solid ground she'd helped build with her own hands, Elena Mercer felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. A sense of permanence, of belonging, of having found exactly where she was meant to be. Not hope, which was too uncertain and too dependent on things outside her control. Not even happiness, which came and went with circumstances. This was certainty, the bone-deep knowledge that she'd taken broken pieces, her own and others', and built something that would last. That she'd proven to herself and everyone else that she was more than what got left behind at a dusty crossroads. She was what came after the breaking, what rose from the ashes of abandoned plans and broken promises, what refused to accept that temporary was all she deserved. She was a woman who'd stopped waiting and started building, who'd chosen action over hope, work over wishes, partnership over dependence. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything she needed it to be. The end.